Oh, now it's live.
Hello, and welcome to our second League of Books. This time we are discussing Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. My beautiful copy. We read this book. We finished it about 3 weeks ago, so hopefully we will remember all of the details. And if you feel the need to correct us, go ahead and leave us a comment.
We don't procrastinate ever.
We never procrastinate. We're not busy people. So, first off, we're both going to go ahead and give just brief overall impressions of the book and kind of what our ratings were and if we would recommend it. And then we'll kind of get into some interesting topics that we'd like to cover because this is really quite an interesting book, especially having been written in the 90s. So go ahead, Ben. Take it away.
Well, first of all, this book is a little bit more closely tied with my career in years, which is kind of an interesting, this book is referenced everywhere in IT and computer nerdy circles, I guess. But it's a fascinating look back at when the internet was first taking off and when the web was first taking off, and Stephenson's ideas on what would become the internet and what would become the web and how we interact with people online. A lot of his ideas from that way back then are now becoming reality, and we're learning from that, and just it's a really insightful look into our current situation from the past, and it's just really fascinating to see that, and it's just really cool because it's obvious Stephenson knows his stuff, and it's just a really fascinating look at computers when computers were first really taking off into the home.
And would you rate it, and would you recommend it?
I'll go with a 4.5 stars out of 5.
4.5.
Totally not just made up. I definitely recommend it. If you have any interest in the cyberpunk sort of sci-fi, it's a great book, and especially if you have any interest in computers and how the modern web has got to where it's at and what it has become, this is a perfect book to kind of, fill that niche. It's, perfect for that crowd.
Right, and I would definitely agree with that. Bouncing off of what you said, it was 1992 when this book was written, and so some of the things that he predicts or sort of incorporates in his story, like the metaverse, it's kind of crazy how that could actually be a possibility now, where in 1992 that was just this crazy sci-fi idea. But with the Oculus Rift and the sort of internet capabilities that we have now, that's a real tangible sort of thing while being intangible. But the fact that Stephenson can wield that very, I want to say scientific, that's not the right, real technical knowledge of that sort of IT security and IT basis on the computer stuff, and then mix that with this sort of very interesting, almost the technobabble, paired with this almost kind of cheesy, kitschy story, because the main character is called hero protagonist, and so the melding of that, while I think that it could have been a dry read or a too cheesy read, I think that it blends pretty well, and I would definitely recommend this book, especially if you're into that sort of cyberpunk sci-fi genre. So I, not being in IT, probably didn't love the technobabble as much as you did, so I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5, but I would definitely recommend it.
Yikes, scandal in the making here.
I know. There's going to be a brawl.
That half a star.
There's going to be a brawl over that half a star later.
Not okay.
All right, so if you have not read the book, you should probably stop now. Pause it, go read the book, and then come back and finish watching us. But we are going to get into some spoilery details and kind of discussion, so if you haven't read it, you might spoil some things.
Probably.
Yeah, so the first thing we'll talk about, so first thing we have on our menu is the relationship between the main character, hero protagonist, and his sort of sidekick, YT. YT is a 15-year-old girl who makes her living as a messenger or runner.
Courier.
Courier with a K. Courier with a K.
Yes. Because
What does she call it? Pooning off of metal cars on the freeway?
It's not what it sounds like.
It's very different than what it sounds like. Using her...
Go ahead.
Sorry. That's what it's called, though,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Way
yeah,
easier to read
just
that
continue.
than it is to say that. But she uses her poon to get around town.
She does get around town with the poon.
Well, back to...
And there goes our video. I'm so crashed. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, YouTube's probably taking us down now. So, and then Hero, I think, is 30, right? 30-year-old, somewhat unemployed hacker.
Unemployed by choice.
Unemployed by choice hacker who has some katanas.
He's a hero.
And he's a hero, obviously.
And the best sword fighter ever.
And the best sword fighter. So, what did you think about their relationship? What kind of relationship?
It's very, like, older brother, younger sister-esque. Like, they don't... I don't know, he really depends on her to, like, pull off, like, several of his action, especially, like, late in the book. Like, he really depends on some of the information that she gets to him. And, like, she just... I like that she's not dependent on him and he's not dependent on her in any way. Like, their relationship is just completely beneficial to themselves. Like, she's interested in getting, like, some of his, like, some of the things that he's got, some of his capabilities. This is really going nowhere right now. But it's like a completely symbiotic relationship. Like, neither one of them is only benefiting, like, at the other's expense. You know what I mean? Like, they both have things to gain from their relationship, and so it's just really interesting from that regard. And it is, like, again, like, there's nothing romantic in their relationship, which I appreciate, especially since she's 15. But, like, they're just both very, very different characters who happen to have something that the other one can use. And so, like, their relationship just grows on that, which is kind of a funny place to start.
Right. What I really like about the way that their kind of stories run is that they both have these stories that seem very distinct, and they kind of have their complete own storylines.
Right.
Like, Whitey kind of gets involved with the mob, and then Hero is involved in trying to figure out this whole virus that's affecting the metaverse. And they kind of intertwine, and then they call each other, and I need you to do this, and you need to do this. But it's very much not, even though I think I called her the sidekick at one point, she's very distinctly not the sidekick. She has her own story and her own stuff that she's investigating.
She really, like, doesn't give a damn about, like, the virus stuff. Like,
right, that's not her thing.
Right, like, you know, like, she never comes in and helps because she wants to help figure out what the hell the virus, what's going on there. Like,
yeah, I think she eventually does get roped into that sort of thing because she kind of goes and tries to do files and stuff, but it's more because of the mob getting her involved.
Right, like, the mob is the one that, like, escalates that for, like, it's less Hero.
Right, and I think that's very, very interesting. And I think it's really interesting because she kind of just gets involved because she's interested.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no, in the very beginning, I mean, she helps Hero, because in the beginning he's a pizza delivery guy.
And she delivers the pizza.
And she delivers the pizza, and it's mostly because she can.
Because she pooned on his car.
Right, and she kind of is like, well, I pooned on this car, so I'm gonna go ahead and help this guy. And there's never, like, he doesn't have any hold over her at all. Like, there's no blackmail, there's no emotional, like, oh, I'm your savior, I'll teach you everything I know. It's just kind of like, oh, you know what? I'm really interested in what this kind of mystery that's unfolding. Like, I'll get involved. It's never... And so I really liked Whitey's character for that. And I really love that she has a boyfriend, but he never, ever shows up. And she just kind of talks about him like, oh, yeah, it's just this guy. I don't know.
Well, and did they ever actually confirm, like, whether or not it was, like, he was real? Like, I could also see Whitey as, like, very much being the person who's like, oh, yeah, I've got a boyfriend. And just, like, she uses that to, like, divert...
Oh, I don't know that I ever thought about that. I mean, that's a fairly standard tactic, I would say, like, in real life. Like, people making up pretend boyfriends. Doesn't she call him at one point, though?
I don't remember.
And she's like, hey, I'm doing this crazy stuff, and he's like, all right.
Because nobody in the world has ever faked a phone call either.
You can't fake a phone call.
Oh, okay.
It's real.
Apologies. I lied on the internet.
Can't put anything on there. I can't put this.
Sue me.
So I think we'll move on because we do have a bunch of things we were going to talk about. The next thing on our list is the dentata.
Because
So we're going to talk
it
about.
required an entire item.
It's an entire item on the list because even though they never, like, they don't explain what it is until the very end, I had a definite idea from the first time they mentioned it what it was.
Yeah.
I ended up being a little bit wrong, but Ben and I were on the same page. We definitely thought dentata meant there were teeth involved, especially that there was that wonderful movie Teeth that came out like 5, 7, I don't know, years ago.
No.
So definitely thought there were going to be little teeth involved, like maybe some metal ones, I don't know. Protecting YT's poon.
No, this is the other poon.
Oh, sorry. Wrong poon.
Don't mix up poons. That's gross.
I know. So I definitely thought there was something else going on there. And then if you have read the book till the end, you find out that it is a little metal needle.
Dermic needle.
Little dermic needle that injects
some sort of
sleeping agent into a man's
Which
really bothered which really bothered me because it was kind of a, I don't know how much I can say on the internet, but
yeah, danger.
There was action that had already taken place before the needle.
And then he just happens to fall asleep, which he probably would have done anyway.
Which isn't necessarily what I would want in that situation. I feel like I'd want some more violence and or stronger action being taken. So I don't really know what the point of the dentata was. Because it didn't really prevent anything.
It doesn't prevent anything. It's just
like, put him to sleep, so now you can cuff him and call the cops, but trauma already happened.
Action already takes place.
So Neal Stephenson, if you're watching this ever, I'm disappointed.
Anti-preventive.
It wasn't preventative.
When it was so built up, they mentioned that
7 times before it happened.
Times. And so it's just the whole thing where it's building up and you're this is something's gonna happen, it's gonna be awful, and then she sleeps with Raven. I'm like, oh shit, guy's gonna be messing some important parts of his anatomy, and then he just falls asleep, and it's okay.
And then I'm like, well, and then he's involved in the climax of the,
which he might not have been if he had not had.
Right. So I'm pretty disappointed on the dentata. That gets 0 stars out of 5. Maybe a half a star. I'm pretty disappointed.
Wow.
I am. I was very much expecting, this guy's going to get his comeuppance. You don't talk to 15-year-old girls like that or try and get in their pants. And I'm like, yeah. And then it was oh, he went to sleep.
Yeah.
So, no
Which,
stars.
I mean, I'm not horribly upset, but it was built up and then just...
I was, expecting violence,
especially since
which is probably bad.
Since she willingly slept with him too, it would have been so much worse and so much more hilarious because of that. I say hilarious very lightly.
Very lightly. Very lightly. But I definitely, there was kind of a whole weird she was there's something I should remember, but I don't really remember it. And you're it's the dentata. You talked about it 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I wasn't really. I was very confused on that.
I forgot.
Oops, I forgot about this very dangerous, important thing in my anatomy. Okay, let's move on. Before I say something that's definitely not going to get this video posted. So, I definitely have a very well-written point here. Weird future world with capitalist country things.
Yeah, I don't even really know what you're talking about here.
There's no longer nationalism for the sake of nationalism, I feel in this. It's nationalism for protection and or profit.
Right, and the mega corporation.
Right, and so everything's...
It's kind of cyberpunk.
Corporation. Yeah, so it's the Hong Kong, or Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong, and...
Right. Then, the mafia is, technically... Because there's no laws. Because there's,
Costa Nostros. I'm butchering that.
And yeah, the mafia is more or less just a legal entity.
Mm-hmm.
like the government can't enforce anything.
Because they're... Oh, yeah, and then the federal building, everyone's really sad and wears blank colors and, like, has to walk everywhere because taking the elevator is seen as...
Stephenson has a really positive outlook on government.
I definitely think he's a fan of government.
Yeah, can tell.
So I really liked that. One of the things I thought Stephenson did incredibly well was not really explaining everything, but giving you enough information that you could put it all together.
Right.
So he never was like, this is the future. Everything has now become a capitalist, or like a corporation, blah, blah, blah. It was just, he kind of explained it and you picked up the pieces and put them together. And so I thought that was incredibly well done, because I think if you don't do that well, then you can definitely lose your readers and nobody wants to, like, have to put stuff together. So he walked that line really, really well. One of the things I loved but was, like, really sad was, like, all the poor people lived in these U-Store-It containers in LA. And I lived in LA for a little bit, and there are these, like, you just drive by the freeway and there's, like, these storage places, and so all I could imagine was, like, all of these having their, like, their doors rolled, like, halfway up, and just, like, these kids and people, like, sitting around in them, and I was like, well, like, oh, this feels way too possible.
This kind of leads into the next point a little bit, but, like, it's interesting, and we're, like, hitting that point now even, where it, like, their life on the metaverse is more important and more real to them than their life in real life. Like, the U-Store, it really, like it's not the focal point anymore, because, like, a lot of their lives are carried out in the metaverse, and, like, they have entirely different personas there, and so, like,
right,
the line between real life and, you know, the meta life is blurred.
Right, and I mean, that's really, really obvious in Hero, I think, as the main character, because he lives in one of these U-Store-It's with a roommate. He doesn't even get one of these by himself, and he has to, like, pay at, like, a gym thing to use the restroom and shower.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I mean, you take sort of those luxuries for granted, but he is this kind of, I mean, like, he leads this kind of difficult, very, like, bland, sort of not great life, if you include, like, the U-Store and that sort of things. But then he enters the metaverse, and he's this, like, sword-wielding, like, yeah, like, he gets into the clubs really easy, and he's the only one who knows how these daemons work, because he's the one who programmed them, and he's, like, super cool and knows all the VIPs. He's got all the hacks. So it's, like, that's a really interesting dichotomy, especially, like, in a main character, to have him be sort of this, I mean, he's not a nobody, but that's kind of the feeling that you get when he's, like, living with all these other people in this storage unit, and then he goes to the metaverse and he's, like, this really cool sort of, like, guy you want to know.
Yeah. Yeah, and even in the metaverse, like, he takes pretty big steps to, like, not be as visible as, like, he could.
Right. Right, yeah, he's definitely not, he's definitely not, like, celebrity for celebrity's sake in the metaverse. He, like, he wants to be in this, gosh, I forgot what the club is called.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have to Google that. Yeah, I know. So he definitely doesn't try to, like, capitalize on that and be like, I'm really awesome, like, you want to be my friend and that sort of thing. But he does sort of take that privilege for granted and, like, really wants to be in the club and wants to be involved in that. But it's mostly because of the owners of the club were people that he was heavily involved with in his past, like Juanita.
Nobody wants to talk about the club, but
nobody wants to talk about the club? I'll just read the book really quick. It'll be really easy.
Damn it.
Yeah, not happening?
I don't remember. Whatever.
Well, somebody will tell us in the comments, I'm sure. Duh, you guys.
Because we're failing miserably.
So then, we didn't really okay, so now we're moving into Ben's favorite topic, which is all of the technobabble.
Yeah.
And the computer nerdy stuff.
God, where to begin? So, like, part of this, and I'm gonna kind of go back and forth, but, like, part of the really interesting thing, and I brought this up at the beginning, is how much I mean, we look at, like, Star Trek and what effect it's had on technology as a whole, and, like, I really think that Stephenson's books, and Snow Crash in particular, since that's our focus, like, it's interesting to see what, like, his ideas about what the internet would turn into, like, how that has actually taken place and done, and, like, how much, you know, like, how influential are his ideas on that? Because, like, there's things, because, like, the entire thing about, like, these people who are living their lives on the metaverse, and like the majority of their time is spent there. Like that's taking place now. Like we have the idea of like avatars, and like these like complete like communities that are organized around an internet place. Like it's just completely electronic based communication, like meeting places, and it's just a fascinating take because we're reaching that. Like we take a look at, I always think of World of Warcraft because it's going to be or Second Life. Like it just becomes like, to the people who really get involved with that, it does become more than their real life. And like Snow Crash is like hinting at that sort of a possibility in '92, back when like the majority of people had no idea what the web was, and we're just like getting an idea of what the internet was, and it was still in its infant stage. Like the fact that he can like go in and write this story about these things that like we're seeing now is either really prophetic or just self-fulfilling, or a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. We do sort of have this, I don't know where the sun is coming from. We have this, I know, we have this sort of like escapism into virtual reality or virtual life, and he does that in a very distinct, and like metaverse is like this thing, but we have all these little escapes, like all these different things on the internet. Because I mean, who doesn't have like a virtual? Let me grab this. Who doesn't have like some sort of virtual persona?
Right. And like World of Warcraft and Second Life, where you can, which I don't know if you can actually do this in World of Warcraft, but there are plenty of MMOs like design your own like home, design a living space that others can come and visit you and do all that stuff. Like there are all these things that are starting to imitate our real life more or less, and like we can see the beginnings and see very easily how where we are at now can evolve into the future that he wrote about, where we are all defined by a digital space, and like we have a digital address, digital clubs.
Yeah, I mean, like we're not going to be goggled in the way that Stephenson's characters are, but we're going to be like Oculus Rifted in.
Right.
Live in our virtual reality.
There's Google Glass.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Virtual reality is just like encroaching onto real life, and like, I mean, the way he writes the book, like there are plenty of times where maybe you're not quite sure if this is real life or is he in the metaverse right now. Like it's very much blended, where social interaction is not defined so much by whether or not it's in real life or on the electronic spirits, because they're one and the same. Like there's very little difference there in the eye of the reader.
So the other thing I want to talk about, besides the whole like metaverse, is the sort of theme that's underlying the whole mystery in Stephenson's novel, which is the idea that a human mind can either be programmed like a computer or contract a virus like a computer. And so he uses this idea that seems sort of mystical, these words or these like series of words, which would be like a little snippet of code, or I guess, or whatever, that can, upon hearing it, change the human brain.
Right.
So that you can no longer, I mean, that was the idea at the Tower of Babel, was like, that's what they were saying happened, was all of these humans got infected with this virus, and so they could no longer speak this main language, and they had to sort of invent all these other languages. Because this main language, which was Sumerian, was like the programming language.
Right, machine code.
The machine code. And then the idea that they could then discover this and then use it to sort of program the human brain.
Right.
What did you think about that?
Well, like again, like it's a really, you can almost like think, like it's implausible, right? Like you first look at it and you're going, okay, well, no, blah, blah, blah. But like the more and more you think about it, like it starts to become plausible. Like as you kind of like look through these lanes, like you think about all the work that we're doing, like understanding like how the human brain is mapped and like how neurons interact. Like we're making these great leaps, and like the idea that, you know, like we might have subconsciously almost designed computers to be a very basic idea of how the human brain interacts, like is a really fascinating concept. Because we would, you know, again, it'd be a subconscious thing where we're implanting that. Now we're looking at the possibility of computers who are functioning more or less the exact same way that the human brain interacts. So how much of it is how much of a stretch is it really to say from there that maybe there is some sort of way to reach deep inside and reprogram the human brain just using language.
Well, I mean, I don't know. With language, again, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I kind of feel like language is a little bit basic. Like maybe there is
Well, yeah,
some sort of thing, but
like
I do
what language we know as we know
right.
it. But like
You're
that also
right.
ties, because like then that like because he brings up speaking in tongues as being
Oh,
part of
right,
that,
as being
which
like
like
part
that
of
starts
that.
to tie into the religious part of this here. But like like so far as we know it, speaking in tongues is again a purely religious thing. To a more of a logical mind, it's going to be just something that's made up. But like
Right.
he ties more of a significance to this, where we don't understand what it is, but it is interacting with us on a subconscious level. And that's why this has existed for such a long time in different religions and areas. Like it's reacting to us in a way that we don't understand, but it is.
I mean, I really think like they've made great strides in things where they put on prosthetics that are mechanically based and then the brain controls them, and I think it's probably not a huge stretch from being able to like program the brain to be able to do things like that, to be able to program it to do something else. I mean, I think there's going to be limits, but I mean, I don't think it's quite as implausible as it probably seemed in 1992.
Yeah, right. That's the I keep coming back to that. Like the fact that he's having these ideas in '92.
Right.
And, like we had made huge leaps in computing at that point, but like it's still
But
to the general
nowhere near
person. '92, yeah,
nowhere
like that's the
near
beginning.
like this.
You're
I
right.
mean,
Like that's incredible. Like having these ideas.
so I think that's pretty crazy. We kind of jumped into the next point, which is about the whole Sumerians and their kind of coding language, their machine code. So that was pretty fascinating because I just felt like it took this very futuristic like computers, especially at that time. I think computers were probably, I mean, at the time they were for us, but we were really young. But like this very crazy, like new technology, and it was incredible what you could do with them and what you were thinking you could eventually do with them. And then relating it to this very, very ancient sort of basic civilization and equating them. And I feel like that was an incredible bit of storytelling. So I think Stephenson did really well with that.
Mm-hmm.
So one other thing we wanted to talk about, because it was one of our favorite parts of the book, but Fido, or the rat dogs that were part of Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong security system.
Right.
That was a very
like really, really small part of the book, because I think they only really get brought up twice, like when they first escape.
Yeah. I mean, it's only a couple of times, handful of times.
And then at the very end, like really small part of it, but like I think it brought up some interesting, like combining robotics with organic material, I guess. So like we're again like getting into bionics and getting into that sort of cybernetic, like really interesting. Like there's a lot of just a lot of questions that raises, like ethical questions and such, because like there's some humans that have had it done, but like nowhere near the extent that rat dogs were. And like the fact that like the rat dog came to save YT at the end, like because of what she had done before to kind of save the one that got injured. And like so it's still on, again, like a very basic level, like understands what she had done and like knew she was in trouble and came to like save them. Like just really interesting part of that.
Right, and that was like a whole topic that really could have been explored in this book and wasn't, but it was like the sort of cyborgs, or the idea of combining this. I mean, they're very advanced technological area with like organic material, like humans or animals, and I did think it was very kind of, I mean, like we'd enter into a sort of lawless zone with this book. Like there wasn't a whole lot of, I mean, murder and like robbing and all of this sort of thing was only kept in check by the greater powers. Mm-hmm. It wasn't so much a law system. The law was sort of like
Fluid?
purchased. Well, yeah, it was like it wasn't a government agency. It was security forces that were hired, or like it was all corporations and sort of for-profit things.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, so it's definitely an interesting. I mean, like it's kind of like a like moral dilemma. Like, is it okay that he just took these animals? But I mean, if they were going to be put down, is that a worse life, a better life? I mean, the little glimpses we got into the rat dog's mind, he seemed happy, very happy. They sort of implanted these ideas that he was a very happy, like he dreamt of running through fields and all these things. So that was very interesting. I did love that they kind of, in all of this futuristic, realistic sort of tone of this novel, there was kind of this like hope with this rat dog. Like, oh, he remembered this nice woman who helped him, and like he's gonna help her, and it was kind of like a sweet little touch that I enjoyed.
Kind of badass.
And it was all so bad.
No big deal.
But
yeah.
Okay. So as a villain, well, as the sort of
sympathetic villain.
Sympathetic? I don't know. I was gonna say as sort of the villain that we got to see, because there was sort of like this whole movement of like people that we were against, but like the one that was actually involved with everyone was Raven, who had quite the interesting like backstory. At least he was quite the well-rounded character, even if I was not his biggest fan.
I just like, it's just hard not to like feel bad for the guy in a way.
Yeah, I mean, but it was, I mean, they do that though, is like Hero and Raven had like the exact same, or almost the exact same backstory, and they went incredibly different ways with it.
Yeah.
Right, which I felt, I mean, because it was Hero's father was in the, I mean, this is kind of a loose translation of history, right, but Raven was an Aleutian, and Hero's father was Japanese, so they were both in an internment camp.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, they were both sort of treated that way by their governments or by our government treated that way. And Hero came out of it with sort of a, like, you know, we endure what we have to and we fix it or whatever. And Raven came out of it with, like, a very vengeful, like, we're gonna get back at you. A little bit vengeful.
Carries around a nuke.
A little bit. Carries around a nuke. Bio time to his body. If he dies, it goes up.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do that.
Not a bad protection measure. Yeah, like you could kill me, but you're gonna have a bad day.
And everyone around here is also gonna have a bad day.
Yeah, a little bit.
So I thought he was a very well-rounded character, and I thought he was very interesting and very tough to sort of defeat, which is all characteristics of a good villain. So that was really well done. We kind of covered this with the Dentata thing, but had a real problem with sort of Raven and YT's little thing, especially because
she's 15.
She's 15, and he was incredibly like forceful. Like he was like, "You don't get a choice. Come back to my bunk." I'm like, no, not okay with this. After that, I was like, well, done with Raven. No sympathy for that. But
I mean, he was forceful, but she was also kind of into it, which
right.
That's a whole other thing. But there's a fine line there. Like,
but I mean, if you read it, he really is like.
I agree. Like he's very forceful.
He's like, come with me.
That's good. But like.
One for Dave.
Yeah.
And I'm like.
Like, I don't know. That's a really like fine line for me. Like he is very forceful, and like, you know, it goes along with his being kind of a, well, let's not use that word, Google. Just not a very nice guy. Just
not a very nice guy.
But like, I don't know. It's just a fine line there because she kind of was into it.
Right, which I'm not sure. Neal,
there are questions
you're
there.
Watching, could you explain that to me? Why does she suddenly? I mean, I guess she does kind of like.
To me, she just wants to buck like all of the traditional
on the wild
rules.
side.
Yeah, she just wants to buck all of like the traditional rules and the traditional ideas.
But I still feel like, I watched this guy use one of his glass or ceramic knives or whatever they were to like gut somebody like a fish. But that's hot. Definitely gonna.
I tell you what. I can hardly contain myself.
Hardly contain yourself during that part. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
that Raven.
that Raven guy
That Raven guy.
really knows how to kill people.
Yeah. But I really liked the whole sort of race between him and Hero at the end, and that whole. I liked that, but I was definitely cheering for Hero.
Well, Hero's kind of a badass. How can you not cheer for a guy named Hero Protagonist?
Hero Protagonist.
Have we mentioned that that's his name?
I know. Let's see if we can mention that like 5 more times in the video.
It even fits.
So, actually, kind of going, kind of relating to the dog is the next thing. I should probably look up his name and not just call him this. In my notes.
Like a whole other thing. Whole other thing.
Man ban, which does not sound at all okay or appropriate. But
sounds like a business title. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm gonna print out business cards. The man ban.
The man ban. Are you Googling this?
What kind of service do they provide? Yeah, I was trying to find his name, but
he's very interesting.
Failing me.
Oh no. Man, the internet is supposed to be helping us. But there is, while we're looking for this, but there is a man who, oh, it's because it's, oh shoot.
Mr. NG.
It's like Nye, right? Nye?
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I apologize if that's not correct. You can feel free to
I don't apologize.
comment.
I apologize for nothing. Suck it.
But he needs a motorized wheelchair because he's unable to walk, and so what he does is fuses himself into this giant armored like Humvee type weaponized van that he controls with his brain so that he can spend most of the time in the metaverse and only occasionally come out. So that is a very interesting.
Well, like, yeah, like that feeds back into like his life
some
is
of our
now
several topics.
His life is more defined now by like his persona in the metaverse, like than it truly is by like him in like real life. Like he would define his existence by his presence in the metaverse.
Right, and in the metaverse he has like women massaging his shoulders and bringing him drinks, and he sort of lives this luxurious life. And in the metaverse he like cannot get out of this van pretty much. Or sorry, in the real world he can't get out of this van. He is pretty much built into it. I mean, he gets fed through like tubes, and I mean he does not leave. Like that's what but that's a very
and that's a whole other big thing with like moral issues with that too, because like I would imagine like again we're going to reach that point where we're going to be able to do things like this for people who are maybe like incapable there of like living a normal life as we know it, and like so again like this just raises all sorts of moral questions there, like where do we draw the line in cybernetics, and where do we draw the line with like doing that for someone, and like again like what do we like if that person is going to truly be able to be happy like in some sort of metaverse, or like if they would define their existence by that reality, then is that okay? Is that right? Or you know, like it's just it really all leads back into like he's just really looking into the moral questions behind that sort of a life, and like what we're going into as a society. Like these questions are going to be at the forefront of how we define our reality.
Right, and I don't think Stephenson makes any sort of judgment for the most part on any of these things.
Right.
He just presents them as possibilities or as these different ideas.
Yeah, in his timeline, that's what had happened. Like that was an acceptable thing.
Right.
And, like, is that going to be the case for us? Like, is that okay? Is that what we're, do we look at that and say, okay, that's a future I can live with, or
do we do something about it now?
Or do we need to change something? Like, he just has a lot of really interesting ideas there throughout the entire book, where, like, he has an idea of where things are going, and, like, he's proven to be pretty far-sighted on a lot of them. Like, how much of it are we willing to look at and say, I'm okay with, like, the fact that this is kind of where we're going?
Yeah, So, readers, if you've watched this whole thing, you've gotten a lot of spoilers. But if you're looking for a book you can talk about or brings up a lot of moral questions you could bring up with your friends or with people you know.
Dinner parties.
Dinner parties. This is definitely a dinner party book. Go ahead and check out Neal Stephenson's Snow Crash. Do you have any final thoughts, Ben?
Other than like Hero's super awesome exit with his like title card.
Oh,
I want to look that up because I don't remember what his exact quote.
Oh, it's like right at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Man, we should have written all these things out, shouldn't we?
Probably. But like, it just makes me happy because like he pretty much like saves the entire like stadium of all like the hackers, right?
Oh, are you ready?
They're gonna deliver like the payload. Okay, so you've got it ready. So like they're gonna deliver the payload of like this virus into like all of the like hacker mindsets because they're the ones who are most susceptible to the virus.
Susceptible because they are used to
COVID
it
all the time, right? And so like this virus is going to be delivered, and Hero manages to, like disarm it at the very last second. And remember, like he's kind of a freelance hacker for hire, and
instead of the virus, what pops up on the screen is, if this were a virus, you would be dead now. Fortunately, it's not. The metaverse is a dangerous place. How's your security? Call Hero Protagonist Security Associates for a free initial consultation.
I wanna think that when my chance to save the world comes around, because it will.
It will.
That I managed to have the foresight to get a little bit of advertising done in the same moment.
Yes.
That's
just remember to program the timer, like the bomb countdown timer that's coming, Ben. Just remember. Yeah. Call Ben.
It's just like so perfect. Like, you very nearly had your life ruined, thanks to me.
So if you're feeling grateful, give me a call.
Yeah, just give me a ring.
All right.
Way to recover.
This was The League of Books for Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. Next, we will be reviewing Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, which Ben is still reading.
Yeah, I am. Mystie.
So keep an eye out for that in the next couple of weeks. See you guys later.
Bye.